Well, good morning, everyone. We are 9:01 at my time, so let's get started. Welcome to CAHR 2022 and the 14th Annual New Researcher Workshop. My name is Riley Tuff. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Manitoba and this year's CAHR trainee representative, serving as co-host with Dr. Sarita Parashar. I'll turn it over to you for an introduction.
Thanks so much, Riley. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarita Parashar. I'm a research scientist with the Division of Epidemiology and Population Health at the BC Centre for Excellence in HIV/AIDS in Vancouver, and adjunct professor at Simon Fraser University with the Faculty of Health Sciences. My place of work, and I'm joining today from the traditional ancestral unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, that's home to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I'll turn it back to Riley to do our official land acknowledgement and welcome you for the day.
Thank you, Sarita. Today, I am speaking to you from the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We wish to acknowledge that the land on which we gather virtually for CAHR 2022 is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Luane-Pewauk people, who have longstanding relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include the Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories, we acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in a partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. Each presenter today will handle questions differently, and we'll let you know which method they prefer. Some might prefer you to raise your hand or type questions into the chat, and then we can read them out for you. The New Researcher Workshop series is an important part of CAHR's mandate to promote education and the development of researchers, and part of CAHR's workshop series that take place over the course of the year. The next workshop will be held virtually on June 6th, 13th, and 20th on advancing research integrity in HIV social science research. It's a new investigator workshop, and more information on that and registration can be found on the CAHR website. Going over today what it will look like, we'll begin with Dr. Keith Folk talking about getting your trainee application funded. We'll take our first break, about 10 minutes. Feel free to get some water, get some coffee, get reinvigorated for the rest of the talks. Then we have talking to media and a 20-minute lunch break after that. How to write and publish scientific research, followed by another 10-minute break. And at the end of the day, we'll be exploring career paths and avenues to success with a series of different panelists. It's a fantastic session. I highly recommend sticking around to the end of the day for that. This is my fourth CAHR now, I believe. I've attended the New Researcher Workshop twice in the past, and I just have to say personally, it's been a fantastic experience for my graduate studies, and I hope that you can take something away from it today that really benefits you in the future. A couple of other important notes throughout the week here. I just want to mention that we have the Mark Wainberg lecture tomorrow, keynotes on Thursday, the basic and clinical sciences, and on Friday we have the epidemiology and social science keynotes. And on Friday is the trainee forum. It's our first time running this forum, and it's really designed for graduate students, individuals who are master's, PhD, or postdocs. I highly recommend checking it out. The purpose of that forum is going to be to create documentation that CAHR can advocate on behalf of trainees to really improve our funding, training, anything that we might need. It's a fantastic opportunity. But thank you to all of today's presenters, and a special thank you to today's sponsors, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the Canadian Association for Global Health. I don't know if there's anything that needs to be added, Andrew, but other than that, I might turn it over to Keith.
Great. Thanks very much, Riley. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Keith Folk, and I'm a professor in the Department of Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases at the University of Manitoba. And I've had the pleasure of presenting at the CAHR New Investigator workshop in the past. So it's a great opportunity for trainees to get some information. Ideally, we'd be doing this in person. I'm also the president of CAHR, and it was a tough decision not to hold the meeting in person, but we had to make that call in January. And at that time, it was quite apparent that the Omicron pandemic was only increasing. And we decided to go virtual this time. But we're hoping that we'll be able to be in person at next year's meeting, because one of the important things of this new researcher workshop is making connections and getting to know some other trainees and learning from each other a little bit. And that's really hard in a virtual format. So I think a lot of the content that you'll get from this workshop will be excellent. But in terms of making networks, I think that's where other events like Riley's workshop, that's going to be really important there to get to know some other trainees, whether they're students or fellows, and find out that you're not the only one going through the challenges and the great parts of your training that's happening right now. So I think that I always say that you get out of something exactly what you put into it. So if you want to get a lot out of the conference, then make sure you put a lot of effort into the attending sessions and attending. So I think that a little bit of planning and a little bit of work on your part will make sure that the CAHR conference is really productive for you. Okay, great. So my job today is to try and help you get funding for your first studentship. So I'll just call up my slides. Presentation mode. Swap screen. All right, great. So hopefully you can see that and hear me okay. I can see Riley and Sharita, so let me know. Okay, thumbs up. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll try to engage with the audience a little bit. Hopefully we can get people to participate a little bit in the format of the presentation. I might ask a few questions, and we'll see if we can get some feedback. But we'll play that by ear. Okay, so the objectives of this session are to really encourage new investigators to get your own funding through scholarships and fellowships. Give you some basic information about what is required to develop a scholarship application, we would do this in person normally, the exercise about your research environment, but I'll frame it in a way that maybe you can do that in your own environment. And again, for expanding your network, that's where the student activity later in the workshop, later in the week would be great. So all the information that I'm going to be providing to you is, you should take with a grain of salt. So should you listen to me, says who, like why listen to Keith Folk? Like, who is he? Why listen to him? first of all, you shouldn't listen to me. You should listen to people who know you and who know your particular situation, and people who you trust and who are, people who appreciate your particular field a lot better. Don't listen to me. Listen to people who you respect and who've been through what you're going through, and who know your field better than I do. I'm a basic scientist, so I study the immune system. I study how HIV interacts with the immune system and causes problems. I study influenza and SARS-CoV-2 as well. But I'm approaching, my lens is through a basic science point of view. I did my PhD at the University of Manitoba, and then postdoced in Bethesda at the National Institutes of Health. I worked in industry for a short period of time, and then I got an academic position back at the University of Manitoba, where I do a lot of work based in Kenya. That's what the perspective that I'm presenting from. I'm not a social scientist. So the perspectives from social clinical is not something that I have firsthand knowledge of. So it's a disclaimer. But as an applicant, I've applied for many awards and been turned down from many awards. I have been lucky enough to get master's, PhD, and postdoctoral fellowships. I did get a CHR New Investigator Award when they still offered them. I tried twice and never got it, and got it on my third time. So persistence is important. And I've received a Manitoba Research Chair. So I've been an applicant in a number of different scenarios, sometimes successful, sometimes not successful. As a reviewer for scholarships, I've reviewed for local agencies within Manitoba, nationally, CHR and Alberta and Ontario. And then internationally, I run an international infectious disease and global health training program. And we review applicants from all around the world for that. And also as the former chair of the graduate studies, graduate studies at the University of Manitoba in our department, I saw lots of applications coming in from around the world. So have some perspective from that. But the bottom line is, don't listen to me, listen to people who know you and who you respect. Maybe we can try something here. In the chat box, maybe we'll just take a moment and ask people if you can write in there, what's your level of training? Are you a master's? Are you PhD? Are you clinical? Is that, I'll give you a second to do that. I'm not clear that I can see those responses. Oh, there they're coming in now, great. Master of Public Health, great. A couple postdocs, PhD students. Master's in Immunology, Physiology, MSc, Micro. Excellent. Good, we'll keep them coming in, that's great. It helps, I think, me to know who's in the audience, and also a peer educator. Okay, great, welcome. Community-based researcher. Okay, great. So that it helps to know who's in the audience, and again to appreciate the diversity of the trainees that we've got. Okay, excellent. Next. Maybe we can do a hands raised or a thumbs up in terms of how many of you have written a scholarship before? Should we use the chat function better for that, or? Yeah, let's use the chat function. At least I can see that. Several people have written one. Okay, that's great. So my point is that a lot of people have already had some experience, some successful, some not successful. Again, go to participants tab. Sorry, I'm just in the presenter mode. I don't know if I can see the participants tab.
Keith, can you see the responses, or do you want me to read them out?
I can see the responses. I'm trying to find the participants tab, which when I'm in presenter, oh, it's over here on this other screen. Excellent. I'll just pull that over, and then I can see people raising their hands. Okay. Great. Thanks. Gee, it's only been 2 years of Zooming. You think we'd all know how to do this, but we'll get there. So yeah, a lot of people have written scholarship applications. So what I'm about to tell some of you already know. So you know, that's good experience. And then again, let's have it in the chat box. Have people been successful at receiving scholarships? Some yes, some no. Yeah. CAHR 1 counts, everything counts that you put in. So great. Again, lots of people have had success, and other people have had some wins, some losses. The point is that your fellow trainees are a great resource for getting advice about how to write a scholarship. Not everyone is successful all the time, but some are. So look to the trainees around you, maybe those that have gone a little bit ahead, and get some advice from them, because your fellow trainees are a great resource. Okay, so I think everyone appreciates probably the basics of what a scholarship application is, but in case people don't, I'll lay that out here. So a scholarship application is where you present, you know, who you are. It's I think of it like a business plan. This is who I am. This is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to achieve those goals, and this is why you should invest in me. And that's one of the things that I want to get across, is that there's going to be lots of great, very strong applicants in the competition along with you. So why should you get the application when others won't? Usually funding is quite difficult, anywhere from 10 to 30% success rates. So why should you get the funding and not others? So why write a scholarship application? So I'll just give you a second for you to think a little bit yourself. Why bother writing a scholarship application? Do you do it because your boss tells you you have to, or do you do it for the fame and glory? Why bother writing a scholarship application? Well, one of the obvious answers is to get salary or more salary, to get a stipend. That's a good reason. Another reason, and again, put things in the chat as I'm talking. You can add your own reasons for scholarship application. One of the reasons why I think it's useful is it forces clarity of thought. Sometimes you can have a sort of a very good idea about what your project is going to be, but until you really write it down in a formal structure, in something more than a 1 or 2 lines, it sometimes is a little bit vague. And so putting down your research project in the form of a scholarship application really helps you clarify your thought. You can also summarize your career plans. Maybe the first time that someone's asked you, so what are your career plans? You know, it's worth taking a little bit of time to think about that. Like I said, it sort of forces clarity of thought. It helps you develop your goals, hypothesis, and objectives that hopefully would be developed as part of your graduate program, but not necessarily. And also these scholarship that I'm referring to, often I'll be sort of defaulting to a graduate student applying for an award such as a CAHR scholarship, but it could be a community person applying to attend the International AIDS meeting. There's lots of different types of applications that people put in. So if I'm sort of defaulting to that graduate student applying for a studentship funding, forgive me, there's lots of other ways in which people apply for scholarships. Another advantage is that it's externally funded. It's externally reviewed. And this is important because it allows you to realize that other people have looked at you and what you're doing and have provided comment on it. They can let you know that if you get it, then obviously you're doing well. One disadvantage is that often you don't get reviews back from studentships, but if you do get the award, then I think that's positive affirmation, and that's really great when you put in an application and you get it, and then that means that someone who doesn't necessarily know you, who's not your mother or your supervisor, thinks you're worth investing limited dollars in. That's a fantastic feeling. And also, I think the most important reason is that it's the critical first step in you becoming a successful researcher. If you look at successful researchers, they all started out by getting studentships, and it sort of builds momentum. It's like a snowball going down a hill. You get a first small scholarship, and then you get your next larger one, and then you get a fellowship, and then you get a grant, and things just gain momentum. And it gives you that first vote of confidence to go ahead. So what are the parts of scholarship application? Again, many people will know this. And again, I'm referring to mainly a graduate student or a fellowship application to something like a CHR. So there's components such as the CV, which is who you are. And then, an assessment of, what do people think of you? Are you any good at what you're doing? So your transcripts, what are you good at academics? The letters, are you good at getting, getting positive feedback from mentors and other people who would write letters for you? What do you want to do? So the proposal itself. So you might be a really great person and have really high grades, but what is it that you're actually going to be working on your project? And then where will you do this? The environment that you'll be doing it, the training expectations, the university, the lab, the department, what's their background, and your supervisor. Sometimes the supervisor's CV is included in the application, not always. But one of the main things I want you to take away from this session is that not all scholarships are reviewed equally. If you're a master's student or if you're a postdoctoral fellow, they're viewed and they're evaluated very differently. And you should know how a scholarship is going to be evaluated even before you start writing it. So the first thing to appreciate is that your scholarship is not going to be reviewed by an expert in your field. So if you're like Riley and do HIV genetics for your research project, your scholarship application might be reviewed by a neuroimmunologist. It might be reviewed by a social scientist. It might be reviewed by a clinician. And all of these people are very bright people, but they're not experts in your field. So don't write in acronyms or jargons, and don't assume that the significance is obvious. So for those of us in the HIV field, we know that HIV is still a problem and it's a growing problem. But for others who aren't in the field, they hear that there's, antiretroviral therapy and people can be treated with HIV and live with it for a long time. So, maybe they think HIV, the challenges in HIV are done, and that, we really shouldn't put priority on this when we have so many other things to work on. So don't assume that people will know the importance of your problem. Take a line or two in your application to state the significance. As I said, different weighting for different levels of application. Studentships are often reviewed virtually and not in person. And there's often very little feedback from the agency. Sometimes you can contact people to try and get a little bit of feedback, but often there isn't any. So just to compare the different ratings. So this is for the Tri-Council harmonization of graduate studentships. And this is master's students. So for a master's student, a great majority of the weighting is placed on grades. So your academic record is the most important thing. If you're applying for a master's and you have a very low GPA, then you have to, there's nothing you can do about that, but you have to realize that that's going to take a lot of the weighting, and therefore you have to make up for it with other areas. Research potential, and again, someone at the master's level might have worked as a summer student or worked as an undergraduate student a little bit, but they won't have a lot of research experience, so there's less assessment on that. And then your personal qualifications or your personal characteristics, which is from the letters, that's viewed at 20%. How are doctoral scholarships weighed? So here the weighting is a little bit different. With your research ability and potential accounting for 50%, and your academics and also your academic activities that you might have been involved in up until this point weighing in a little bit more. So it's more on not so much your grades alone, but what you've actually been doing, your activities. Scholarships such as a Vanier scholarship, which is the highest scholarship given out to Canada, they put a lot of weight. I think 1/3 of the weighting is based on a student's sort of leadership and extracurricular activities. So if you're applying for that particular scholarship, then you really want to emphasize some of those volunteer and outreach activities. But this was less emphasis during the master's. And also here at the master's level, at the PhD level, doctoral level, they're already looking at the quality of your publications. So there's an expectation by the time you're applying for a PhD scholarship that you would be getting publications. And I think to be competitive, having publications is a really good idea. For a postdoctoral fellowship from CAHR, just point out a couple of things. So the letters that people receive are about 20%. So that really hasn't changed all that much. But your specific publications, that now accounts for 30% of the weighting. And your grades through your academics, 10%. So by the time you're a postdoc, people don't really care what your grade was in undergrad, to be blunt about it. Yes, if you had low grades during your undergrad and then you published a bunch of papers, then that shows that as a researcher, you've been productive. So, keep in mind how things are going to be evaluated before you even start writing. We'll get into this, but the training environment is really important. It's not all about you. It's about where you're going to be working and what your project is. So in terms of a couple of tips, in terms of how you prepare your scholarship applications, I think the hardest thing to prepare is your CV, because it takes a long time to get items into your CV. It's not something that you can make it look nicer, but you still have to, get a line in that CV. So as an example, in your CV, I hope you have a professional development section, and I hope that in that section you write this workshop down, that in 2022 you attended the CAHR New Investigator workshop. That shows that you're continuing to look to improve yourself, and you're not just taking the courses that your program tells you have to take. You're showing initiative and looking to develop your professional career on your own terms, and showing that initiative. So that's really important. So make sure you do that. So the CV is hard to necessarily make a lot of changes, but it's important. So one of the most important things from a CV is the manuscripts that you are present on. And when you apply specifically for CAHR, they tell you that you have to add a sentence underneath each manuscript and say what your role is. So as an example, in my sort of biomedical field, usually the person who's the first author is the person who did most of the laboratory work and wrote up the first draft of the manuscript. And then the last person in the author list is usually the senior investigator. So in publications from my lab, my students are first authors and I'm the senior author. However, in other fields, that's not the case. In some social sciences field, it's the head of the lab is first, and then it sort of goes in a descending order, and the person who did the least amount of work on the paper has their name at the end of the author list. So you need to explain to the reviewer, who could be a social scientist, they could be a basic scientist, you need to explain to them why you're second author on a paper. I did all of the work for 3 of the figures and wrote the results section for that. So that shows that you did a lot of the work for the paper. So you need to specify what your role is and quantify it. I contributed to 25% of this paper. So it takes a long time to build your CV. So again, papers are probably the most important aspect of your CV as you develop your career. But you shouldn't wait until the end of your master's or your PhD before you start writing papers. You should start at the beginning. And there's a number of different ways you can do that. Yes, data papers are important, and those come towards the end of a project. But during your project, you can write a methods paper, you can write review articles, you can write an opinion article, or even a lay article in the newspaper. reaching out to the general public is really important aspect of knowledge translation. And you should have a knowledge translation section in your CV. And if you do an interview in the radio, or if you are a guest on a podcast or something, then you should put that in. So you should be thinking about how, a lot of times you put in a lot of work to develop your research proposal. Can you take that information and build it into maybe a review article or a methods paper? Some students in my lab now are working on methods papers, or sort of simple scientific communications. Like, it's not a whole complex paper, but it's a very focused research communication. So think of other ways that you can write a paper. And yes, data papers are valued a lot more, but oftentimes, just based on the title in your CV, it's hard to tell what's a methods paper, what's an opinion piece. I would advise against having the word review in the title of your review paper. This is a review of HIV risk factors in elderly patients or something. You know, just say it's risk factors in elderly patients. So that way, you have to make the reviewer do their job. If they value a data paper more than other papers, then they can look for the details. Something that you also want to do to build up your CV is present. So you can, hopefully many of you are presenting at CAHR, and so that's important. There's a big difference between someone attending a conference and someone presenting at a conference. And there's also a difference between presenting a poster and presenting an oral presentation. So if you did manage to get an oral presentation, then make sure in your CV it's clear that this is an oral presentation, so that, because that's viewed a lot viewed more prestigiously. Awards, if you, in your department, if your department gives out awards for best student presentation for this or that, make sure you put those in your CV. Any kind of poster competition that you won, those are great. Sometimes awards aren't worth a lot of money. In our department, we give out best student presentations, and they're $100. Well, $100 isn't a lot of money, but what its value is, it's the line in the CV. It shows that, among 65 students in our department, you were one of the best to give a presentation. And so that gives the reviewer of your application some sense that you're, the quality of your abilities. And so sometimes it's the purpose of applying for an award. Sometimes the universities have a lot of small ones. And don't think that because it's a small amount of dollar value that you shouldn't apply for it. The value is getting your line in the CV. And what's really important in your CV is showing leadership. So how do you, have you helped to organize a conference? So Riley, being a trainee rep for CAHR, that's a line in the CV. And another one is, co-chairing along with Sarita this workshop. So anytime that you volunteer to do and organize something, then that goes in and that shows good leadership. Have you helped, if your department doesn't have a journal club series, maybe you could start one, and then that can, you can indicate that you started a journal club. Have you worked in the community in any way, organized students? Student leadership is always highly valued. You need to present it in your CV in a leadership section, and don't just leave it to the reader of your CV to pick, oh, okay, that's probably a leadership activity, and that's probably a leadership activity. Make them easy for the reviewer to see and clump them together. Great, so that's your CV. So as of today, you'll have one more line in your CV. So already we're making great progress to making you successful in getting your next CV. The transcripts. Here's an exercise for everyone. So I want you to think of your GPA. If you're a brand new master's student, then think of your undergrad GPA. If you're a graduate student, think of your actual GPA. So think of that number and even write it down if you wish. You don't have to put it in the chat at all, but just think of that number. So the number that I'm thinking about is 3.9. Okay, so 3.9. I put in a scholarship application, and I say in the cover letter, dear reviewers, I think I should deserve this scholarship because I'm very good in my academics, and I have a 3.9 GPA. Do you think a 3.9 is a good GPA? Well, it all depends on the context. Every university has a slightly different way of doing the GPAs. So if an A+ is the maximum score, at the University of Toronto, a 4.0 is the maximum score. So if a student has a 3.9 and they're from the University of Toronto, wow, that's an A+ average. That's very impressive. If you're at Mount St. Vincent, it's a 4.3. Okay, so 3.9 isn't quite as high. At the University of Manitoba, an A+ is a 4.5, and an A is a 4.0. So 3.9 is a B+, almost an A average, so that's pretty good. At York University, they work on a 9-point scale. So now this 3.9, maybe that's not such a great GPA. McMaster has a 12-point scale. A 3.9 out of 12, that's not looking very good. University of Regina works in percentages. A 3.9%, that would be a pretty low GPA. And international applications, they're all over the map. And sometimes a student will have a 72% average from an international university. And compared to a Canadian university, that might seem a little bit low, but the 72 might be the highest grade in the entire class. So you really have to tell people the context about that. So if you're an international student and you have a 72% average, tell them that the class average was 62%, and my 72 represented the top 2% of the class. That's really important. So the bottom line is GPAs are really confusing to reviewers, and you have to tell them what the denominator is. I had a 3.9 out of 4. I had a 3.9 out of 4.5. So let them know what I had a 75%, and it was the highest in the class. That kind of thing. So don't assume that the reviewer understands your GPA letter grading system. You tell them what your denominator is and what your class average is. Oftentimes people's academic career progresses, and people may not start out in their first couple of years of undergrad with great grades. Maybe they haven't learned necessarily how to study for university courses. Maybe something happened at some point. I know in my second year of undergrad, I moved out of my home and lived on my own, and that had some distractions and some challenges. And so in my second year, my GPA dropped a little bit. So what you can do is focus on the last 60 credit hours. So you could say I have an overall a 3.5 GPA, but in my last 60 credit hours where I focused on, microbiology or whatever it is, my GPA is a 4.1 or something like that. So, you can show them that as the courses sort of narrow down your interest, your GPA went up. Also, if you received honors and you got some honor designation, make sure you tell people what that is. Summa cum laude, not everyone speaks Latin and don't know if that's in highest degree or with greatest honors or what that means. And if you can at all, quantify. I ranked top in my class. This represents the top 2% of my class. Any way that you can quantify really helps the reviewer. Looking at the chat here for a second. Lots of good discussion. Okay, great. Letters. In terms of, it's always an important component of a scholarship application is the letters. And it's really important that you get a letter from someone who knows you and your research really well. The reviewers don't care how important the person writing the letter is. So if I got Anthony Fauci from the NIH to write me a letter for my scholarship, and he wrote, Keith Folk is a good guy and he should get this scholarship. Signed Anthony Fauci. People even that, first of all, many people reading that, they're not experts in the field and they may not know who Anthony Fauci is. I mean, now with SARS-CoV-2, most people probably do, but the content of the letter is really what's important, not who's writing it. So you have to get someone who really knows you. They should be a faculty member. That's not always necessarily fair in that there might be a postdoc or there might be a technician in your environment who knows you really well and could probably write a good letter. But most of the time, reviewers want to see letters from faculty members. The exception would be if you're working with community as part of your research project. And if you get a letter from a community leader, that would be really good as well. And you have to be strategic and ask people who will highlight different things. If you have 3 reviewers and they're all saying that you're a bright person and you have good research abilities, that's nice, but it's the same message all over. You might have your supervisor talk about your research abilities. You might have one of your professors talk about your academics, and maybe someone else talk about your ability to present your oral presentation skills from a journal club or a research seminar or something like that. And when you ask the person, say, I'm applying for this scholarship, would you mind writing a letter of reference for me? I'm asking you because you were the course director for this course, which I really enjoyed and did really well in it. And I hope you would be able to comment on my academic ability or something like that. So by all means, ask people that highlight different aspects of your skill set. And when you ask them, tell them why you're asking them. Now, you can't really tell this to the person writing the letter, but when you're asked to write someone a letter, you should really try to quantify it. I can write a letter for 2 different people, one who's a good but not great student, and another one that's a great student. And the letters can look pretty similar, like, oh, this person is diligent and they work hard and all that. But what really is important is that you distinguish that that you know, the really good student is amongst the top 2 students in this year's, or top 2% of students in this year's class. So it's really important to let the reviewer know that yes, the person is good, and yes, they're diligent, and all those kind of generic terms. But when you get down to quantification, you know, I've written letter for students where I said that in my 20 years of being a faculty member, this student is the most engaged in the community of any student I've seen in 20 years as a faculty member amongst 200 students that I've known. So the top student, that says something, as opposed to, you know, they're a nice person and they work hard. So quantify as much as you can when you're writing the letter. You can't really tell the people when you ask them, oh, can you write me a letter and can you quantify just how good I am? It's probably not appropriate. Already mentioned that they should know you very well, and also someone who is dependable and can follow instructions. I have to be honest, writing some of these letters is really complicated. Sometimes there's websites you have to log into, and you have to fill out their forms. You can't just write your own letter. And for example, CAHR, you're asked to comment on like 7 different abilities, such as persistence, knowledge, communication skills, all different kinds of things. And you're asked to write a specific comment on each of those abilities. So that takes time. So make sure that you're asking someone who is dependable and can follow instructions. At minimum, you want to give someone at least 2 weeks notice, and preferably longer if you can. When you ask them, you should provide your CV, your marks. You ask them and then they say yes. Then you provide them your CV, your marks, and as much as possible the application. So you might ask them well in advance and then say that when I'm done the research description, I'll forward that to you as well, or have it done in advance, so that when the person's writing their letter, they know what your project is, they know what your most recent marks are, and they can look at your CV. So make sure you provide all of that. And I would say, you know, not only don't be afraid to give a gentle reminder. I personally really appreciate it when students say, you know, thanks, Keith, for agreeing to provide that letter. Just a reminder, gentle reminder that it's due in a week. If you need any additional information from me, I'm happy to provide it. So gentle reminders are really appreciated because people that you're asking are probably quite busy. If there's a special form or a link or something like that, provide that to the person so that they have that, so they don't have to look up. So I know some students have asked me to write a letter, and then I've had to go onto the web and try and find out where my letter is to be submitted, and I find out it's not a letter, it's a form, and it takes a lot of work sometimes. So do a lot of the work for the reviewer. And sometimes some people will ask you to draft a letter, or sometimes I'll ask students, you know, give me 4 or 5 key points that you wouldn't want me to omit in my letter. You know, key points about you that you would really want me to see in the letter. So, you know, I'm not asking the person to write the letter for me, but I'm asking them to highlight a couple of things. And usually I'll already have thought of a couple of them, but another couple I say, oh, okay, I didn't really appreciate that. So I'll incorporate that, or some of them I'll look at and say, well, that's not really appropriate either to comment on or for me to comment on. So that's great. I'll get to questions in the chat box sort of at the end. Other things about the proposal, again, really convince the reviewer why they should care about your field. Don't assume that they'll know about the field. In your research proposal. Talk about in the background what's known and what's not known, or the gaps in knowledge. In the biomedical field, it's required to have a hypothesis. In the social sciences, sometimes it's an objective. So that depends on your field. But your hypothesis should be something that can be tested and should be very specific. What is not effective is when you have a hypothesis such as, well, we don't really know a lot about the immune system and HIV, so I'm going to be exploring the effect of HIV on the immune system. Well, that's pretty generic and pretty hard to test. I mean, how do you really test that? So you have to get really specific in your hypothesis so that it's something that can actually be tested. I would recommend 2, maybe 3 objectives. I've seen some applications that have, 8 or 9 objectives, and they're not really objectives, they're steps. So I'm first going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. That's not really what an objective is. And an objective is sort of a broad category of how you're going to be testing your hypothesis. Your objectives should be framed in such a way that directly address the hypothesis. One really important thing is, if you can at all into the application, sometimes studentship applications are 3 pages long and allow appendices and figures to be attached. Sometimes they're a box that's half a page. If it's possible, try and show the progress that you've already made by including some preliminary data. That will show that you're already working in the lab and you've already got some systems in place. And even if you're just learning techniques, you can present some data that shows, the figure 1 shows that I'm learning how to do some analysis of microbiome data. Not necessarily on your own project, but it's sort of a learning exercise. Or the figure shows that I've been trained in flow cytometry or microscopy or something like that. And then finalize your research proposal part with a statement about significance. So, through this research, we hope to be able to address the gap in knowledge, which would further the field because of this way. So the last thing someone should get out of reading your proposal is sort of a summary statement, or, okay, at the end of all this work, this is where we'll be. And that will be important. What's also important is training expectations. So what is your career goal? If you're pursuing a master's, what's your long-term goal? Do you want to be a clinician scientist? Do you want to work in industry? Do you want to work in academia? Do you want to be a science writer? What's your long-term goal, and how will this current project and your current degree help you achieve that goal? Again, if there's room within the application, do some of the work for the reviewer by stating your GPA, by stating awards that you've won, and really talk about your training program. So often people just say, oh, I'm in a master's program. Well, master's program's different. How does your training environment differ to those of the other excellent applicants who will be applying for this application? If you say, oh, my training environment is, I'm doing a master's at the University of Manitoba, Department of Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, and we take several courses and we have journal clubs. Well, to be honest, every med micro department across Canada has courses that they take, and probably do journal clubs as well. So that really doesn't provide a lot of specificity. Does your group have lab meetings? Do you do literature reviews? Is there any additional training programs that you attend? Our department runs an international infectious disease and global health training program, which is outside of the main graduate program. So students attend that and can list that. And then importantly, you should frame how, by taking this degree, this will help me achieve my goal of becoming a blah, blah, blah. Also, you have to give a sense for the wider environment. Does your university have placed a lot of priority in your research field? At the University of Manitoba, they've have signature areas of research excellence, and infectious diseases is one of them. So you can mention that. Is your area of research at your university or in your department, is there a strong history of that, or is this a new priority? And were you selective, and was your boss selective? So the default will be that you're a desperate student looking for any supervisor who will take you, and you didn't really care what the project was, and that your supervisor was desperate and was looking for any warm body that would work on the project. So that's what you have to assume is the baseline assumption, unless you say something else. So you could say, I looked at 5 different labs across Canada, and I chose this one because of the following reasons. And I was very pleased that my supervisor selected me because there was very strong application pressure for this position. So I'm very pleased to have been awarded this because a lot of other students were looking at it as well. So, make sure that you indicate why you're in your current environment. Was it because you really liked the work of the supervisor, or was it because they were the first person to say yes to you? I'm sure they weren't, but you have to distinguish that. And is your supervisor work alone, or do they work as part of a group? That's important to describe the group. And how good is your lab, your supervisor, your group, or how well are they doing? One way to indicate that is the lab well funded? My supervisor has 3 CAHR grants, and I'm pleased to be working on one of them. Is your supervisor well known in the field? Does your lab publish well? Do previous trainees in the lab, have they published well? And do you have any unique facilities? What's unique about your research environment? So when you get all of that together, you can also prepare by asking from some of the other colleagues if you can look at their scholarship applications. Now remember that this is their intellectual property. They've developed the projects, and so you need to keep that in mind as you read and keep their work confidential. But look at their scholarships, see how they wrote, see if you can get scholarships from different applications, and then see how you would reframe your own application. Sometimes agencies will post examples of scholarships, not often, for confidentiality reasons. And then you can also, if your supervisor is reviewing scholarships, even after the fact, you can offer to help review scholarships, just to get a sense to look at them. And of course, this would have to be done confidentially. So again, this is, you have to be a bit of a salesperson. This work is really important. And you need to be enthusiastic in your writing. I'm excited by the prospect of working in this field. We've made great progress, and we're enthusiastic about the potential to have an impact on people's lives, that kind of thing. If you can't be excited about your project, then the reviewer certainly isn't going to be. Convince the reviewer that you are in the right environment to get the project done, that you've performed well in the past, and that you've got a long-term career plan, and this is an important piece of that puzzle. And all they have to do is fund you, and then the rest of the dominoes will fall. Again, lots of excellent students won't get funded, so why should you? Have your own set of reviewers, even family members. Again, the scholarship application is going to be reviewed by non-experts. And so even your family members should be able to read through your research proposal and make sense of it. It's your job to communicate by using common language. And when someone doesn't understand your research, it's not because they're dumb, it's because you're using terminology that they're not aware of, and that you're using phrases that they're unfamiliar with. So it's your job to communicate effectively. And even a family member can read it and make sure it's written well. And they, again, make sure you're don't overlook the big picture. And then meet with the people that have reviewed your scholarship and go over it. And again, if someone criticizes you, don't take it personally. They say, I really didn't understand what you were getting at this part. Don't get mad, just try and figure out how to get that communication through more effectively. So in the end, what you want to do is make sure you quantify everything. What was your GPA? What does it mean? Were you at the top of your class? State for the reviewer how many papers and abstracts you had. Don't leave it to them to count up. Actually, I was writing a letter of promotion for a colleague, and they were, being promoted to full professor, and so they had this very complex CV, and I wanted to say, in the last 5-10 years, the person has produced this many publications. Well, I had to go into their CV. I had to copy out, because it was in Adobe, I had to copy it out. I had to put it into Word, and then I had to hit the quantify or the numbering thing, because I wanted to know how many publications they had. And they had like over 50 publications, and I didn't want to lose count. Whereas if they had written in their CV somewhere, I have 75 total publications or something, it would be really useful. So same with you, I've got 3 papers published, 2 more submitted, and 7 abstracts. So quantify, and also quantify the contribution on your papers. Reference letters should quantify how good you are. That's really out of your control, but when you're writing them for other people, make sure you do that. And why is your research environment so special? Why is this the perfect environment for you to do this particular project? It's not just enough to say, I'm good, the project is good. Why, and the supervisor is good. Why collectively are you a great team for getting this done? Sometimes there'll be, at CHR, there'll be priority announcements. And these are an ability to get a second shot at funding. I'm not really sure if there's any available for studentships. These are often for grants, but sometimes they're for studentships. So just make sure that you're applying for all of the opportunities that come along. So start local and then work your way up to national. Always try to add a line in your CV whenever you attend a workshop or something. Make sure you add a line in your CV. In a lot of ways, I'm not very well organized. If I showed you my desk, you'd see it's not very well organized. But one thing that I am really good at is keeping my CV up to date. So yesterday, I received the good news that I was a co-author on a paper that was accepted. And so right away, I added that to my CV because I'm sure that I would forget it I would forget it to add it. I'm almost done here, and then we'll take some questions. But remember, success rates are low. So if you don't get it, don't get frustrated, but somebody has to get it, so why not you? Good luck. If you don't get it, don't get mad at the reviewers, or if you do, get mad at them only for a day or two, and then cool down, and then look at it again and figure out how next time you can improve things, whether it's your CV or other things, or applications. So don't give up. At some point, I want you to think about your research environment. Why did you choose your environment? Why did you choose your supervisor? Why did they choose you? And what's unique about your particular environment? You'll get these slides later. And again, don't listen to me, listen to other trainees that had lots of good advice about things such as focusing on your training expectations, write with enthusiasm, have preliminary data, get the right people for the references. Make sure that the letters are clear, training expectations, why you're the best person to do this project, leadership, volunteer, etc. Have a good CV, that kind of thing. Okay, great. So I hope that you've got a couple of ideas for how you would do your next scholarship application, maybe a little bit different. We'll go to the, I'll stop sharing. And go to the chats. So I saw one about discrepancies. How do I go about reassessing my CHR application if there's a noticeable discrepancy between reviewers? That's going to happen. That absolutely will happen. Sometimes one reviewer will like you, one won't. The thing that you have to do is go to the one that didn't like your review and try to work on the things that they commented on.
There's another question, Keith, and once again, thank you so much for this presentation. I find that I always have something new to take away from it, and included my scholarships even.
After 4 times, you should be giving the talk.
Well, we'll see. One day, Keith, one day. The question is on how do you find new opportunities, whether or not you're in different fields, like a social scientist, community-based researcher. How do you find these opportunities?
Yeah, it takes a little bit of work. Oftentimes you can reach out to the graduate studies faculty and ask them about different awards. There's oftentimes awards will go unapplied for, and there'll be small awards, like a couple $100, and no one's applying for them. So reach out to the department, reach out to the faculty, and then do your own work. I know students have asked me to write letters, and I said, I've never heard of this agency in 20 years of doing this work. And they said, yeah, it's, I was looking on the web and found them. And I said, are you eligible? And they said, yeah, I'm eligible. I said, okay, great. Happy to. So part of it is, talking to grad studies, talking to your Office of Research Services, talking to other senior students that might have gotten applications funded in the past, and then doing a little bit of your own homework and seeing what's available online. Sarita, Riley, any other suggestions for where to find applications?
Personally, when I look for applications, I focus on some of the smaller ones. So you start to build that portfolio for when you apply for larger ones, that it really helps to beef up that CV, as you mentioned. But for myself, I look into fields that really I think are interesting. So I apply all the time there's a scholarship application through NASA that I apply for every year. But it's these ones that, you're passionate about, but you might not be aware of. You just got to search those out.
NASA, the space agency.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Sarita, where do you get your applications from?
I'm thinking back to when I was a trainee and I wasn't able to hold PI status from CAHR awards, but I used to do the grunt work and put my supervisor's name as the PI, and I got a lot of experience doing grant applications that way. So before I came into this part of my life, I'd spent a lot of time writing compelling proposals, which was really, really helpful for me. And also, it established a lot of community relationships that I otherwise wouldn't have had. And now I've also found that these smaller community organizations, like I'm based out in BC, so the Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, the community, Vancouver Community, I can't remember what it's called, Vancouver Foundation. So they're small awards, and they often require you to partner up with community-based organizations, but it's a really great opportunity to establish those community partnerships, at least in the kind of work that I do, which is community-driven. Something kind of beyond what would be advertised in the university.
Okay, that's great. And don't be afraid if there's an application that says, partnership funding is required. I mean, maybe your supervisor could provide the partner funding for that. I know that at our faculty, there's some new faculty awards, and they require the supervisor to provide some partner funding, which I'm happy to do because I'd rather provide part of the funding than all of it, and then my student gets a line in the CV.
Yeah. Catherine had another question here in the chat. Can you speak briefly on the different strategies for writing master's, PhD scholarships versus postdoc new investigator awards?
Yeah, so a master's or PhD proposal should be really focused. It should be something that is it shouldn't have the breadth of an entire research grant application, and should have the definite achievable goals within the objectives. A postdoctoral fellowship, ideally you'd like to present something that's a project that you can have on your own, and if possible that there would be an aspect of it that you could perhaps take away with you when you move to develop your own research program elsewhere. And you need to talk about that with your supervisor. But I think the distinction is that with a postdoctoral project, you're looking at a much higher level of research expectations. At a master's level, it's more, are you gaining the skills to do the work and have a few results? At a PhD level, it's more, have you asked a question and answered that question? And then as a postdoctoral level, it's really, are you answering a research question and getting at least one publication a year out of your postdoc? That would be the goal.
We have one last question before we take our first break of the day. It's, do you think the personality or level of education can reduce chance to get full scholarship?
The level of education, I think it's more the quality of education. By the time you're in a graduate program, let's say you're a master's program, then that program will have evaluated whether your level of education is sufficient to be in that program. It's up to the universities to assess that. It's not up to the scholarship reviewer. If you're in a master's program, then you're all considered equal. What's important is the quality of the education that you had prior to that. So, if you did a 4-year honors project and received great grades, you had A's and A+ in your final couple of years, I think that's what's really important. There might be some thought about a 3-year degree versus a 4-year honors degree and comparing, but that depends on the field. So in general, if you're in a master's or PhD program, then it's not up to the reviewer to determine whether you deserve to be in there or not. Your university has, and then it's the quality of your work. And what's really important is the quality of the work that you're doing in your current program. So you might have had great grades as an undergrad, or maybe you had poor grades as an undergrad. But then what are you doing in your graduate program? That's what's really important. How are you evaluated? So I might have had a 3.5 GPA as an undergrad, but as a graduate student, I've gotten A+ in all of my courses so far. So that's the kind of thing that you want to focus on. And then in terms of the personality, that really goes to the letters that are being written. I think you just want to select people who write the letter who know you well and can write a good letter. And really the personality, whether someone's grumpy or not, doesn't really come in. It's more how well you work and how well you're effective. So I'm sure you all have wonderful personalities, and people would write great letters about you.
Well, thank you once again, Keith. That was absolutely fantastic. And this recording will be made available, I believe, at the end of the conference as well, if anyone wants to follow up later on as well.
Hopefully the slides as well, because I went through those last ones pretty quickly. And I'll try to look through the comments and add any additional thoughts if we didn't cover it. So great. Thanks, Riley. Thanks, Rita. And thanks, everyone. And enjoy the day. And I guess I'll be back in the afternoon for a panel discussion. Great. Enjoy your break.
Thanks, Keith.
We're going to start with our first, just take a quick 5-minute break here, and then we'll be coming back to talking to the media.